Kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and old arguments. That was the thing about Sunday mornings in my parents' house. The coffee was always too strong, the toast was always slightly charred, and the air always carried that particular tension that I'd learned to read the way some people read weather. My younger brother Owen was already at the table when I came downstairs, scrolling through his phone with his cereal going soggy in front of him. My mother was at the counter, back turned, and my father was reading something on his tablet with the focused expression he used when he didn't want to be talked to. Normal Sunday. Or so I thought. I was 31 years old and still living in the house I grew up in on the east side of Charlotte, North Carolina. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I'd heard every version of it. The polite version from coworkers, the confused version from old college friends, the quietly judgmental version from my father's side of the family at holiday gatherings. What they didn't know, what I'd never bothered explaining, was that I had a reason. Two reasons, actually. The first was Owen. He was 23, working part-time at a shipping warehouse while trying to finish his associate's degree online. He was quiet in the way people get when they've been talked over enough times that they just stop trying. I'd watched it happen slowly. The way you watch a plant go from thriving to just surviving, and you keep meaning to move it to better light, but something always gets in the way. Owen needed someone in his corner, and I was the only person in that house who noticed he was struggling. The second reason was that I had a plan. I was a software developer, remote, full-time, the kind of job my mother described to her friends as "she works on computers" in a tone that made it sound like I spent my days playing Minesweeper. I'd been with the same company for 6 years. I'd been promoted twice. I had a salary that would have surprised most people who assumed works on computers meant entry-level tech support, and I'd spent 4 of those 6 years quietly putting money away. Not in a savings account. In index funds, in a Roth IRA I'd opened at 25, in a brokerage account I'd funded consistently every month like paying a bill. I didn't talk about it. I didn't post about it. I just did it, the same way I did most things, without announcing it, without needing anyone to notice. My parents knew I worked in tech. They didn't know what that meant financially, and I'd never told them. I set my coffee mug down and sat across from Owen, who glanced up briefly and went back to his phone. My mother turned from the counter. "We need to talk about the basement," she said. I looked up. My father set down his tablet. The basement, my space, was technically a finished lower level. I'd spent 3 years slowly making it livable. I'd put in blackout curtains on the egress windows. I'd bought a second-hand desk, a decent chair, a small bookshelf. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The only square footage in that house where I could close a door and hear myself think. My mother sat down at the table. She had her hands folded in front of her, which was the body language she used when she'd already made a decision and was now presenting it as a discussion. "Your aunt is coming to stay with us," she said, "possibly for an extended period. Her situation in Raleigh isn't." She paused, choosing words, "sustainable right now." "How extended?" I asked. "We don't know yet." "And where would she stay?" My mother looked at my father. He looked at his tablet. "The basement makes the most sense," my mother said. "It's the most private space. You'd be more comfortable upstairs anyway. We can clear out the sewing room." The sewing room was 8 feet by 9 feet. It had one window that faced the neighbor's fence. My mother used it maybe 4 times a year. "I have a home office set up in the basement," I said. "My monitors, my equipment. I work from down there every day." "You can work from the sewing room." "I can't fit 2 monitors and a standing desk in the sewing room." "Then you'd only use one monitor." She said it the way you'd explain something to a child who was being unnecessarily difficult. "Your aunt needs the space, sweetheart. She's family." My father finally spoke. "It's not a permanent situation, just until she gets back on her feet." I thought about the last time my aunt had gotten back on her feet. That had taken approximately 2.5 years, during which she'd borrowed money from my parents that I knew, because I'd seen the bank statements they'd left on the counter. Never bothering to hide anything from me because they didn't think I paid attention, had never been repaid. "How long do I have to move my things out?" I asked. "She arrives the Friday after next," my mother said. 10 days. I nodded and said nothing else. I picked up my coffee and went back downstairs. I sat at my desk for a long time that morning, not working, just looking at the space I'd built for myself. The monitors casting their quiet light, the bookshelf with its mix of technical manuals and novels, the small succulent on the corner of the desk that Owen had given me for my birthday 2 years ago, which had somehow survived everything. I opened a spreadsheet I'd been updating for the past 8 months. Then I opened Zillow. I'd been watching the market in Charlotte for almost a year. Not casually. Not the way people browse listings, the way they browse vacation houses they'll never book. But seriously. I had a target price range. I had a list of preferred zip codes. I had a pre approval letter from a mortgage broker I'd been working with since January, which I kept in a folder on my desktop and had never mentioned to anyone. I typed in the zip code for our neighborhood and filtered by price. There were 11 listings within half a mile of my parents' house. I almost scrolled past it. It was the fourth one down, a 3-bedroom craftsman on Alderton Way. I knew the street. I had walked past that house probably 200 times. It had been empty for a while. The lawn going a little ragged at the edges, a real estate sign that had weathered through 2 seasons. I'd never let myself look at it directly, the way you don't make eye contact with something you want too much. Listed at $485,000. In my range. I sat with that for a moment. Then I texted my broker. Her name was Francine, and she was the kind of real estate professional who responded to texts within 4 minutes at 9:30 on a Sunday morning. I had found her through a referral from a co-worker who described her as aggressively competent, which was exactly the kind of person I needed. The craftsman on Alderton Way in my neighborhood just came up on my search. I typed, "Can we look at it this week?" Her response came in 3 minutes. "That one's been sitting. Owner relocated to Denver, wants a clean close. I can get you in Tuesday evening." Perfect. I set my phone down and looked at the spreadsheet again. The numbers I'd been building for 4 years, quietly, without telling anyone, without making it mean anything until I was ready. I ran the mortgage calculation I'd run 100 times before in slightly different configurations. At current rates, with my down payment, the monthly payment would be less than what a 1-bedroom apartment rented for in the same neighborhood. I closed the spreadsheet and went upstairs to help Owen with the dishes. Tuesday evening, I told my mother I was meeting a friend for dinner. She nodded without looking up from her show. Francine was already on the porch when I pulled up. She was a small woman in her 50s with very direct eye contact and a ring of keys she handled with the casual authority of someone who had done this 10,000 times. "Good bones," she said as she unlocked the door. "Previous owners updated the kitchen about 7 years ago. Roof was replaced 3 years ago. I pulled the permit records." I stepped inside. The living room had hardwood floors, original to the house but refinished, warm and slightly golden in the evening light coming through the front windows. There was a fireplace, gas, which I'd learned mattered in Charlotte winters more than people from other places expected. The kitchen was open to a small dining area, white cabinets, stone counters, not flashy but solid. But it was the upstairs office that did it. It was the front bedroom, converted, a built-in desk along one wall, 2 windows looking out over the porch and the street. I stood in the doorway and did the quiet calculation that I'd been doing since Sunday morning. The monitors would fit. The standing desk would fit. The succulent would go on the windowsill. I turned to look out the windowsill. Directly across the street, through a gap between 2 oak trees that had grown just wide enough, I could see my parents' front porch. The hanging basket my mother had put up in apron. My father's car in the driveway. The upstairs window that was Owen's bedroom. I stood there for a moment. "Do you have questions about the property?" Francine asked from behind me. "One," I said. "What's the timeline if I want to move fast?" She smiled like she'd heard that before. "How fast is fast? Before the Friday after next." She looked at me steadily. "That's aggressive. I'm pre-approved. I can do a larger earnest money deposit if it helps. I can be flexible on the seller's preferred close date." Francine pulled out her phone. "Let me make a call. I want to be honest about something because I think it matters." The decision to buy that house was not entirely about my parents. It was mostly about me, about the spreadsheet I'd been building since I was 26, about the plan I'd had for years that I kept deferring because there was always one more reason to wait. One more season. One more project at work. One more thing that needed to settle before I took the step that had been ready for a long time. The timing was my parents' doing. The decision was mine. There's a difference. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't matter. The specific geography of it, the particular address, because it did matter, not in a revenge way, or not only in a revenge way, in the way that the whole point of leaving is sometimes the leaving itself, made physical and visible and impossible to minimize. I was tired of being minimized. Francine called me Thursday morning. Seller accepted, she said. They want a 30-day close, which puts you just past your original deadline. But you can negotiate access for early move in if you're willing to cover carrying costs. Do it, I said. You understand you won't have the keys yet. Francine, do it. She did. I spent that evening in the basement, carefully documenting my home office setup. Photos of the cable management, the monitor placement, the routing behind the wall where I'd run an Ethernet line 2 years ago. I wanted to remember what I'd built so I could build it again, better. My phone buzzed. A text from Owen. Mom said you're moving out. I hadn't told anyone. My mother must have found something, or guessed, or overheard. She had a way of knowing things in that house that I had never entirely figured out. Yes, I typed. Found a place. Where I thought about how to answer that. Close by, I typed. I'll tell you in person. He sent back a thumbs up then, after a pause. Is it nice? Yeah, I wrote. It's really nice. And there's a guest room. The pause before his response was longer this time. Cool, he finally wrote. Just that. But I knew Owen and I knew what he meant. My mother found out about the address 3 days before I moved. I don't know how. I hadn't told her. And Francine was discreet, and I hadn't mentioned it to anyone except Owen, who I trusted completely. My best guess is that she saw Francine's car parked in front of the Alderton house one afternoon when she was driving home and recognized it from the time she'd seen me get into it. My mother noticed things like that, parked cars and unfamiliar faces, the way people do when they've spent years paying attention to the edges of their neighborhood. She came downstairs that evening while I was packing. She stood in the doorway for a moment without saying anything, which was unusual for her. Then she said, "The house across the street." I kept folding a sweater. Yes. Why would you do that? It wasn't really a question. It had the cadence of a question, but the intention of a statement. Why would you do that? Meaning, why would you do that to us? Meaning, what are you trying to prove? I set the sweater in the box. Because it's a good house, I said. Good price, good bones, good location. The office is built in shelving and 2 windows. She was quiet. And I know the neighborhood, I added. I know the neighbors. I know where the good grocery store is and which streets flood in heavy rain. It made sense. Your father will think, she started. I'm not buying it to make a point, I said. I'm buying it because I'm ready to own a home and this was the right one. She looked around the basement, the half-packed boxes, the bare patches on the walls where I'd taken down shelving, the desk already disassembled and leaning against the wall in sections. You've been planning this for a while, she said. Yes. She left without saying anything else. My father came down 20 minutes later. He stood in the same doorway, looked at the same scene, and said, "How much did you put down?" "Enough," I said. "On a software salary." I looked at him. "I've been saving since I was 26. I've been investing since I was 25. I didn't spend money on things I didn't need." He was quiet for a moment. I watched him processing the information, not the specific numbers which I hadn't given him, but the shape of it. The fact of it, that I had been building something for years, without telling anyone, without asking for help or advice or permission, and that the thing I'd built was now going to be visible from their front window every morning. "You could have told us," he said finally. "You could have asked," I said. He went back upstairs. I sat on the edge of the half-packed mattress for a long time after that. Not sad exactly, but feeling the weight of what I'd just said, which was also the weight of every year before it. My father asking about my salary the way you'd ask about someone else's salary, with a measuring kind of curiosity, the kind that calculates rather than connects. My mother folding me into her plans without checking whether I fit. The quiet, persistent assumption that I was available, adjustable, rearrangeable. I'd been rearranging myself for them for years. I was done. Moving day was a Saturday in early October. I'd hired movers, 3 guys named Darnell, Francisco, and a younger man everyone called Sketch, who worked with quiet efficiency and didn't make conversation, which I appreciated. Owen had taken the day off work. He showed up at 8:30 with two coffees and his hoodie and helped in the way he always helped, which was by doing whatever needed doing without being asked and without making a big deal of it. We worked through the morning. By noon, the basement was empty and the truck was full. My mother watched from the front window for most of it. I saw her there when I was carrying the last box out, standing at the window with her coffee, the same way she'd stood at the window when I came home late from college visits at 17, the same way she stood when she was waiting to form an opinion about something. My father had left early to run errands, or said he had. Owen walked the truck over to Alderton Way with me while Darnell and Francisco and Sketch unloaded. He stood in the middle of the empty living room for a moment, turning slowly. "This is really nice," he said. "I know. Like actually nice." He went to the window and looked out at the street. From this angle, you couldn't see my parents' house. The oak trees blocked it, but you could see the end of their driveway if you knew where to look. Owen found it immediately. He stood there a moment. "Does it feel weird?" "Not yet," I said. He nodded slowly. "It might later, probably. But right now?" I looked around the room. The wood floors, the afternoon light coming through the front windows, the fireplace I hadn't lit yet, the kitchen I hadn't cooked in yet, the upstairs office I hadn't worked in yet. All of it waiting. All of it mine. "Right now it feels exactly right," I said. Owen smiled. A real one. The kind I didn't see enough of. And went to help carry in a box. I set up my office first. The monitors fit perfectly along the built-in desk. The standing desk mat went down in front of them. I ran the Ethernet cable along the baseboard the same way I'd done it in the basement, neatly, zip-tied at the corners. The succulent went on the left windowsill where it would get morning light. I sat down and opened my laptop. First thing I did was update my home address in the employee portal at work, in my bank system, with the post office. Small administrative steps, each one a small commitment. Each one a door closing and a different one opening. Then I just sat there for a minute looking out the window. From the office, I could see across the street clearly my parents' house, the hanging basket on the porch, my father's car back in the driveway now. As I watched, the front door opened and my mother stepped out, probably to check the mail. She walked down the porch steps, opened the mailbox, and turned back toward the house. She paused on the steps. She had seen the lights on in my office window. I could tell by the angle of her head, the slight lift of it, the way she stilled for a moment before she continued back inside. I didn't wave. It was too soon for that, and too complicated, and I wasn't ready to turn it into a moment it didn't need to be. I just sat at my desk in my house, in my office, in front of my monitors, and opened the file I'd been working on before any of this started. I worked until 7 o'clock. Then I went downstairs and made dinner in my kitchen for the first time. Nothing elaborate, pasta with jarred sauce because I hadn't stocked the pantry yet. And I ate it at my table, alone, while it got dark outside. It was the quietest dinner I'd had in years. Owen texted that night, "How's the first night good?" I sent back, "Quiet. Mom asked if you're coming for Thanksgiving." I looked at that message for a while. "Tell her I let her know," I typed. "She's not going to like that answer, I know." A pause then. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing." I set my phone on the counter and looked around the kitchen. The unpacked boxes still stacked against one wall, the single pot in the drying rack, the spice rack I hadn't filled yet. There was so much to do, so much to settle, to arrange, to figure out. The house was mine, and it was still unfamiliar, the way anything real is at the beginning, before it becomes ordinary. I was 31 years old and I had just bought a house in cash and mortgage from a plan I'd started building at 25, and nobody had helped me and nobody had known and nobody had needed to. I'd done it in the same quiet way I'd done everything, without announcing it, without asking for permission, without needing anyone to notice until the moment it was already done. "Thank you." I wrote back to Owen. "You're always welcome here, whenever you need it. No conditions." He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was just, "I know." I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. The office window was dark now. I turned off the desk lamp before dinner, but the street lights made the room amber and soft. I stood at the window and looked out. My parents' house was lit from inside, warm and yellow, ordinary. A house I'd lived in for years without really living in it, the way you can occupy a space without ever fully belonging to it. I pulled down the shade. I went to bed in my room, in my house, on my street, and slept without waiting to hear anyone else's footsteps in the hallway. Slept without adjusting myself around someone else's schedule or someone else's expectations or someone else's quiet disappointment. And I was never quite what they needed me to be. Somewhere between falling asleep and waking up, I thought about something a professor had told me in a systems design class years ago, that the most elegant solution is usually the one that solves more than one problem at once. The house was close enough to keep an eye on Owen. It was in a neighborhood I knew, near the routes I'd walked for years. The price was right, and the office was right, and the light in the morning was right. And yes, it was also across the street. And someday, when it was time, when enough of the sharp edges had gone soft, and the right moment presented itself, I was going to walk out my front door and raise my hand in a small wave toward that porch. And whatever my mother made of it was going to be her business. But that morning, I woke up to the sound of nothing in particular. No tension in the air, no coffee burning on a counter that wasn't mine. And I lay there for a minute in the quiet of a house that was entirely, simply mine. Then I got up, made coffee the way I liked it, and started my day. I've thought a lot about the word patient since all of this happened. People use it like it means passive, like being patient means you're waiting around hoping things will get better on their own. But that's not what I was doing for those 4 years. I wasn't waiting. I was building quietly in the background while life kept moving around me and nobody thought to ask what I was working toward. My parents never asked. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not with bitterness, not anymore, but with the kind of clarity I didn't have when I was still living in their basement. They had a daughter who went to work every morning, who came home every evening, who paid for her own groceries and kept her own schedule and quietly, methodically turned her income into something, and they never once asked what she was building. They assumed she was treading water. They arranged their plans around her the way you arrange furniture around a piece that doesn't move, without ever considering that it might. That's what happens when people stop seeing you clearly. They stop asking questions. And when you stop being asked questions, you stop explaining yourself. And somewhere in that silence, you get very good at working alone. I don't think my parents are bad people. I want to say that plainly. My father has his own fears and his own blind spots and his own history that I only understand partially. My mother loves in the way she learned to love, which involves a certain amount of management and arrangement, and not always enough room for the person being managed. Owen saw it. I saw it. We didn't talk about it much, but we both knew. What I learned, not from a book, not from advice, but from living it, is that the consequences of how you treat people don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they arrive as a house across the street. Sometimes they arrive as a daughter who has been quietly capable for years, who finally stops adjusting herself around your assumptions and just moves. Not far, but completely. I earned that house the same way I earned every other thing I have, by deciding what I wanted, making a plan, and doing the work without announcing it. Nobody handed me a down payment. Nobody co-signed anything. Nobody even knew to offer, because I never asked, and they never looked closely enough to see. That used to feel lonely. Now it just feels like mine. Owen texted me last week to say he'd started his own brokerage account. He's 23 and he put in $50 just to start, just to have one. I told him it was exactly right, that the amount doesn't matter at first, that what matters is the habit of believing you're building towards something real. He asked me if I had advice. I told him, don't wait until someone gives you a reason. Don't wait until someone makes room for you. The room doesn't come first. You build the room, you make yourself somewhere to stand, and then you stand there and eventually the light comes on, and anyone who's paying attention can see it. My office light is on every morning by 7:30. I can see my parents' house from my window. Some days the curtains are open, some days they're not. I wave when I see someone on the porch, and sometimes they wave back, and that's enough for now. It's enough to have built something true. It's enough to have done it myself.